There's an invitation, a text, a phone call. Someone wants you to come out, to join them, to be part of something happening outside the four walls of your home. And instead of excitement, you feel something else. Dread, exhaustion, a heaviness that settles in your chest. Not because you don't care about the people, not because you're antisocial or depressed, though everyone will assume that's what it is, but because the thought of leaving your space, of entering the chaos of the outside world, of performing the version of yourself that exists in public, feels like too much. So you decline. Again. You create an excuse. Again. And you stay home, where it's quiet, where you're safe, where you can finally breathe. Maybe you've been told you're wasting your life, that you're missing out, that you need to push yourself, get out of your comfort zone, live a little. Maybe you've internalized those voices and started believing something is fundamentally wrong with you, that you're broken or afraid or less than because you don't have the same drive to be out in the world that others seem to have. But what if I told you that your avoidance of going out isn't a disorder? What if it's actually a profound form of self-knowledge? What if the people who avoid going out aren't hiding from life, but protecting something precious that the constant noise of the external world threatens to destroy? Carl Jung understood something that most people never grasp. He said, "Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." For Jung, the inward journey was the only real journey. The external world, with all its stimulation and demand, was often a distraction from the deeper work of knowing yourself. And for some people, going out doesn't feel like living. It feels like being pulled away from where the real living happens, which is inside, in the quiet spaces where thought and feeling and authentic selfhood can actually emerge. Today, we're going deep into the psychology of people who avoid going out. Not because they're agoraphobic or socially anxious, though those are real conditions that deserve compassion, but because there's another category of people who simply don't find value in the external world the way society insists they should, who have discovered that their home, their solitude, their internal landscape offers something richer than what's available outside. And if you're someone who declines invitations not out of fear, but out of preference, who finds the outside world exhausting rather than energizing, who has been shamed for wanting to stay home, then this is for you, because what you're about to discover will finally validate what you've always known, that choosing to stay in isn't always running away. Sometimes it's running towards something deeper. Before we go further, I need to know you're here with me. Do you avoid going out? Drop a comment and tell me, what do people not understand about your preference to stay home? And if you want content that validates the choice to live quietly, internally, at your own pace, hit that subscribe button. We're building a community of people who understand that home isn't a prison, it's a sanctuary. Let's start with the first psychological truth about people who avoid going out. The external world is genuinely overwhelming to your nervous system. And I don't mean this metaphorically, I mean physiologically, neurologically overwhelming. Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher who understood suffering at its core, believed that the world was fundamentally a source of pain. He wasn't being dramatic. He was observing that existence itself, with its constant demands and stimulation, creates suffering in sensitive beings. And some nervous systems are simply more sensitive than others. Think about what happens when you leave your home. The moment you step outside, your sensory system goes into overdrive. There's noise, traffic, voices, music, the hum of electronics, the chaos of movement. There are visual stimuli bombarding you from every direction, advertisements, faces, colors, motion. There are social demands, eye contact to manage, small talk to perform, the constant awareness of being perceived and judged. And beneath all of that, there's the energetic presence of other people, their emotions, their stress, their needs, all of it creating an invisible field that your system has to navigate. For some people, this is energizing. Their nervous system thrives on external stimulation. But for others, this isn't energizing. It's depleting. Every stimulus requires processing. Every interaction requires energy. Every moment of being out in the world is your nervous system working overtime to manage input that never stops. And when you finally get home, when you finally close the door, what you feel isn't just relief. It's exhaustion, deep, cellular exhaustion, from the sheer effort of existing in a world that demands more sensory and social processing than your system can sustain without cost. Abraham Maslow identified safety as one of the fundamental human needs in his hierarchy. Before you can pursue connection or achievement or self-actualization, you need to feel safe. And for people who avoid going out, the external world doesn't feel safe. Not because of danger in the traditional sense, but because it's unpredictable, uncontrollable, overwhelming. Your home is where you have control, where you can regulate temperature, sound, light, social interaction, where you're not at the mercy of random stimuli that you didn't choose and can't escape. Your home is your safe base, and leaving it feels like voluntarily entering chaos. But there's something deeper happening here. The second truth is that you're not avoiding going out. You're protecting your internal world. Sigmund Freud understood that the ego has defense mechanisms, psychological strategies to protect itself from overwhelm. One of those mechanisms is avoidance. But avoidance isn't always pathological. Sometimes it's wisdom. Sometimes your psyche knows that certain environments, certain interactions, certain demands will fragment you, will pull you away from your center, will require you to be someone you're not. And it protects you by creating resistance to those situations. Jung talked about the process of individuation, becoming who you truly are. And that process requires protecting your internal space from the constant invasion of external expectations. Every time you go out, you're entering a space where you have to perform, where you have to manage how you're perceived, where you have to adjust your natural rhythms to match social norms, where you have to wear what Jung called the persona, the mask you show the world. And that persona is exhausting to maintain because it's not your true self. It's the self that's acceptable, appropriate, functional in public spaces. When you're home, the persona can drop. You don't have to perform. You don't have to be anything other than exactly what you are in any given moment. You can be quiet when you want quiet. You can be emotional without managing how that emotion appears to others. You can move at your own pace, think your own thoughts, exist without constant adjustment. This isn't isolation. This is authenticity. And for some people, authenticity is only possible in private space. The moment they enter public space, they lose access to their true self because the demands of social performance are too strong. Now watch what happens when you really sit with this. The third truth is that going out often feels meaningless to you. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust and wrote about finding meaning in suffering, understood that human beings need purpose. We need to feel that what we're doing matters. And for many people who avoid going out, the activities available in the external world don't provide that sense of meaning. Going to bars, restaurants, parties, social gatherings, these feel empty, performative, a waste of precious time and energy. This isn't depression, though it might look like it from the outside. This is discernment. You've reached a level of self-awareness where you can distinguish between activities that genuinely nourish you and activities that society says you should enjoy, and you've discovered that most of what's available out there doesn't actually nourish you. It drains you. It feels superficial. It requires you to engage in small talk when you crave deep conversation. It forces you into loud, chaotic environments when your soul needs quiet. It pulls you away from activities that actually matter to you, reading, thinking, creating, reflecting, and replaces them with social obligations that feel hollow. Frankl believed that the will to meaning is the primary motivation in human life. But meaning is personal. What gives your life purpose might not involve the external activities that give other people purpose. Your meaning might be found in solitude, in creative work, in deep thought, in the quiet development of your inner life. And if that's true, then going out isn't living. It's being pulled away from where your real life happens. Can you feel this? The frustration of being told you're not living fully when you know that your most alive moments happen at home, in solitude, in the internal space where your true work unfolds. Here's the fourth truth, and this one is uncomfortable. You've learned that people disappoint you. Jean-Paul Sartre famously said, "Hell is other people." He wasn't being misanthropic. He was observing that our greatest suffering often comes from our interactions with others, from their judgments, their expectations, their inability to see us as we truly are. And for people who avoid going out, there's often a history of being misunderstood, judged, or hurt by social interactions that didn't go well. Maybe you've been the target of gossip. Maybe you've experienced betrayal. Maybe you've been in social situations where you felt invisible or misunderstood. Maybe you've realized that most people aren't interested in the kind of connection you crave. They want surface-level interaction, and you want depth. And so you've learned, consciously or unconsciously, that going out often leads to disappointment, that the promise of connection rarely delivers actual connection, that you end up feeling more lonely in a crowd than you do when you're alone. Fromm wrote about what he called the escape from freedom. He observed that freedom is terrifying because it requires us to make choices and face uncertainty. But there's another kind of escape happening here. You're escaping from the pain that comes with expecting genuine connection from a world that rarely provides it. You're protecting yourself from repeated experiences of being seen but not understood, surrounded but not connected, engaged but not truly met. And staying home is how you avoid that specific pain. This doesn't make you cynical or misanthropic. This makes you realistic. You've learned what most people refuse to accept. That quality matters more than quantity. That one deep conversation at home with someone who truly gets you is worth more than 100 superficial interactions at social events. That being alone and at peace is better than being with people and feeling disconnected. This is wisdom, not weakness. But there's a fifth truth that goes even deeper. Your home is your sacred space, and leaving it feels like leaving yourself. Jung understood that our external environment reflects and influences our internal state. Your home isn't just a physical location, it's a psychological container. It's the space where your authentic self can exist without compromise. It's where you've arranged everything, the lighting, the sounds, the objects, to support your specific way of being. It's where you feel most yourself because you've created an environment that mirrors your internal world. When you leave that space, you're not just leaving a building. You're leaving the only environment where your true self can breathe. You're entering spaces designed for the average, the extroverted, the socially normal. Spaces that require you to contract, to adjust, to minimize aspects of yourself that don't fit. And your psyche resists this because it knows that every time you leave your sacred space, you fragment a little. You lose connection with yourself. You return home needing to rebuild what was lost in the chaos outside. Schopenhauer believed that the wise person creates a life of minimal suffering by minimizing engagement with the external world. He understood that desire, ambition, and social engagement create more pain than pleasure. And while that might sound pessimistic, there's truth in it for people who've discovered that their peace comes from withdrawal rather than engagement. You're not avoiding life, you're avoiding suffering. You're choosing the kind of life that actually works for your particular conscience, one that's internal, quiet, self-contained. The weight becomes unbearable when you realize that society treats your preference to stay home as a problem, while celebrating extroverts who can't sit still. That you're pathologized for wanting solitude while people who can't bear to be alone are seen as normal. That your deep work, your creative output, your internal development, all of which happens at home, is dismissed as not really living by people who measure life by external activity. So, what do you do with this understanding? How do you honor your preference to stay home without falling into unhealthy isolation? First, you distinguish between avoidance born from fear and avoidance born from preference. There is a difference. If you're not going out because you're terrified of judgment, paralyzed by social anxiety, convinced that something terrible will happen if you leave, that's fear-based avoidance that might need professional support. But if you're not going out because you genuinely prefer the quality of life you have at home, because you've weighed the costs and benefits and chosen solitude, that's preference. And preference doesn't need to be fixed. Second, you create a life that honors your preference without becoming completely isolated. Even people who love being home need some form of connection. But that connection doesn't have to look like everyone else's. Maybe you have one or two close friends you see occasionally in low-key settings. Maybe you connect online with people who share your interests. Maybe you have meaningful phone conversations. Maybe you go out for specific, purposeful activities that align with your values rather than generic social obligations. You can honor your preference for home while still maintaining the connections that actually matter to you. Third, you stop apologizing. You stop explaining. You stop justifying your choice to stay home as if it requires defense. When you decline invitations, you can be honest. I prefer staying home. You don't owe anyone an elaborate excuse. You don't need to pretend you're busy or sick or have other plans. Your preference is valid. Period. And finally, you embrace the life you've chosen rather than mourning the life society says you should have. There is no single correct way to be human. Some people come alive in crowds. You come alive in quiet. Some people need constant external stimulation. You need internal depth. Some people measure a good life by how many experiences they collect. You measure it by how deeply you experience your own existence. Neither is better. They're just different. Jung believed that the goal of life is to become who you truly are, not who society expects you to be. If who you truly are is someone who finds peace, meaning, and authenticity at home, then staying home isn't avoiding life. It's living life on your terms. It's choosing quality over quantity. It's protecting the sacred space where your real self can exist. You don't avoid going out because you're broken. You avoid going out because you've discovered something most people never learn. That external activity isn't the only measure of a meaningful life. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay exactly where you are, in your own space, doing your own work, living according to your own values rather than someone else's expectations. If you're someone who avoids going out, you're not alone in being alone. Drop a comment and tell me, what do you do at home that feels more meaningful than going out? And if you want to be part of a community that understands that home is not a limitation but a choice, that staying in is not hiding but living authentically, hit that subscribe button. We honor the homebodies, the internal explorers, the people who've discovered that the richest life is often lived in the quietest spaces.